Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something kind of interesting, I think. It's a question that honestly has kind of always been around, but it feels super relevant right now. How do we find meaning in a universe that seems like it doesn't really care about us?
Hmm.
We've got a pretty interesting mix of sources for this deep dive. We've got a sermon, a couple of academic articles, and even a fictional story.
Interesting.
And what's really wild is that all of these sources kind of have the same things to say about dealing with, these big existential questions.
Yeah, it is a really fascinating collection of sources. And you're right. They do kind of talk to each other in cool ways.
Hmm.
One thing that jumps out at me is that feeling of insignificance that you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's like you're just completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of everything.
Yeah, you definitely get that feeling from the sermon in the article called The Rejection of Nihilism. It's like they're really wrestling with the idea that human life, everything we go through, all
Hmm.
of it could just be like a blip on this giant cosmic radar. I gotta admit, reading all that was kind of a reality check for me.
Yeah, I get that. It makes sense to feel that way when you start thinking about just how huge the universe is, or even the possibility of a multiverse.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is how these sources, especially the stuff about the Fane of Yog-Sothoth, they kind of use this feeling of insignificance as a starting point instead of like a conclusion.
Okay, so tell me more about this Fane of Yog-Sothoth. What is that all about?
It's definitely different. It's like a whole belief system centered around things like Yog-Sothoth, which represents how everything's connected, like every single thing is part of one giant whole.
So not your typical Sunday school lesson. So how does this idea of being connected play into their whole philosophy? Does it offer a way to deal with that feeling of being lost in all the vastness?
It does. Their philosophy isn't about pretending we're not small or trying to ignore just how huge everything is. It's saying that even the smallest things have a really important role in the big picture. It's kind of like a tapestry. Every thread, even the tiniest ones, matters to the whole pattern and how beautiful it looks when it's done.
I see where they're going with that. So instead of freaking out about how small we are, we should be figuring out how we fit into this giant cosmic tapestry.
Exactly. And that's what makes that fictional story, What Matters Most, so interesting. It's about this scholar, Nathaniel Carver, who's just totally paralyzed by despair when he realizes just how massive the multiverse is. But then he has this experience, this vision that just totally changes how he sees everything,
Yeah, it's like he suddenly realizes that even though his life seems tiny compared to the multiverse, it's still a part of something much bigger.
right? And that's where the Fane's teachings and Nathaniel Carver's journey kind of meet. It's not about denying that we're insignificant. It's about realizing that being insignificant doesn't mean we don't have a purpose.
Ah,
Even the smallest actions can create ripples that spread out and create meaning in ways we don't always see.
that's a really powerful idea. But it makes me think about responsibility. The article, The Rejection of Nihilism, really stresses that. But how can we even talk about responsibility when the universe seems so random and chaotic?
That's where the Fane's practices offer a different perspective. They believe that certain rituals aren't just about worship. They're actually ways to actively maintain balance in the multiverse.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this whole balance thing.
Hmm.
Is it kind of like gardening where you make little adjustments to help everything grow?
That's a great way to think about it. The Fane believes that just like those tiny particles that make up physics, our choices, our actions matter on a level we might not see right away. It's not just about stopping bad stuff from happening, but also actively doing good stuff to make sure the universe is running smoothly.
So they're saying we have a kind of cosmic responsibility that our choices matter way more than we understand.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And it's not about saying we're all powerful or that we control the universe. It's more about understanding that we're part of something way bigger than ourselves. We're all part of this system, and everything we do, even the smallest things, affects how it all works.
So the Fane of Yog-Sothoth is suggesting that instead of being insignificant specks in a vast universe, we might actually be agents of balance. That's a pretty big shift in how we see things.
It is. It really changes things.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about what meaning and purpose really are in a universe that might seem like it doesn't care about us at all. But what's really cool is how all these sources together suggest that being insignificant instead of making us feel hopeless might actually be the key to understanding our place in everything.
That's a really interesting thought. It seems like we've gone from feeling overwhelmed by the vastness of the universe to considering the possibility that we might actually have a role to play in how it all works. It's a lot to think about.
It is. But maybe that's where the real journey starts.
Yeah.
Embracing the mystery and the vastness and trying to understand how our seemingly small lives can contribute to something much greater than ourselves.
Okay, so we've talked about this idea of being connected and even about responsibility, but it still feels kind of abstract. Like, how do we actually go from feeling insignificant to understanding where we fit in this whole grand scheme of things?
Yeah, that's something the sources wrestle with too. And they offer some pretty interesting paths to explore. The sermon, for example, talks about transcendence through knowledge and connection. Maybe those are good places to start.
So instead of getting all caught up in the anxieties of daily life, we should be focusing on learning more about the world and where we fit into it.
That's the idea. And knowledge in this context isn't just about memorizing facts and figures. It's more about trying to understand the principles that govern the universe. The forces that shape reality at every level.
Right. It's like that saying, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. But how does that actually help us deal with feeling insignificant?
The Fane of Yog-Sothoth believes that by learning more, we start to see connections we might have missed before. We start to understand how things that seem totally separate are actually related, how even the smallest things play a role in the bigger system.
Okay, I can see how that could change our perspective. Instead of feeling isolated and insignificant, we start to see ourselves as part of this vast interconnected web. But what about connection on a more personal level? How do we cultivate that sense of belonging in a universe that can feel so impersonal?
That's interesting. The Fane's writings actually talk about some specific practices that are supposed to foster a sense of connection. They talk about exploring the dreamlands, which is like a realm of shared consciousness and profound experiences that they believe you can access through dreams and deep meditation.
Dreamlands. That sounds pretty far out. Is that like lucid dreaming or something even more otherworldly?
It definitely pushes the limits of how we normally think about reality. They describe the dreamlands as this plane of existence where the usual rules of space and time don't apply. It's a place where people can connect on a deeper level and experience this really profound sense of unity.
Wow. That's not exactly something you find in your typical self-help book, but I can see how that kind of experience could be life-changing, especially when it comes to dealing with feelings of isolation.
Exactly. And it's not just about connecting with other people, it's about connecting with something much bigger than ourselves, with the very essence of the multiverse.
So it's like cosmic networking.
You can say that.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're not just isolated individuals floating around in a meaningless void. We're threads woven into the very fabric of existence.
It's fascinating how all these sources, even though they're so different, seem to agree that connection is key to finding meaning. The sermon talks about finding comfort in community. Nathaniel Carver has this profound connection through his vision, and the Fane focuses on these rituals that help people tap into a deeper level of awareness.
You're right. They all point to a shift in perspective, a move away from that self-centered view that often makes us feel insignificant.
Yeah.
By connecting with something bigger than ourselves, whether it's a community, a powerful idea, or even the fabric of the cosmos, we start to see our lives in a whole new light.
There's this line from the sermon that really stuck with me. Hope is not the denial of insignificance, it is its transformation. It's like instead of trying to fight against the fact that we're small, we can actually use it as a way to grow and discover new things.
That's a really insightful point. And it goes back to what the Fane of Yog-Sothoth seems to believe. Our insignificance isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a journey to understand where we fit in the multiverse.
So, how do we actually start this journey? What are some practical things we can do to move from feeling insignificant to feeling connected and having a purpose?
Well, the sources have some interesting suggestions. Some are more concrete than others. And those are what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've explored some pretty mind-blowing ideas in this deep dive, like cosmic interconnectedness and the idea that we have a responsibility in this massive universe. We even talked about dreamlands, but I think we're all ready for something a bit more down to earth. How do we actually take these ideas and turn them into something real, something we can use in our everyday lives?
Yeah, you're right. It's time to bring these concepts back down to earth. And you know what? The sources actually offer some practical guidance. Remember how we talked about the Fane of Yog-Sothoth's focus on rituals? Well, those aren't just about keeping the cosmos in balance. They're also about personal transformation.
So it's not necessarily about doing these elaborate ceremonies or chanting in robes. It's more about finding ways to incorporate meaningful rituals into our own lives, things that help us connect with these bigger ideas.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about figuring out how to make those big concepts part of our daily experience so they feel real and relevant. For example, the Fane talks about meditation as a way to tap into that feeling of interconnectedness.
That makes sense. Taking some time to quiet your mind, to look inward, and maybe even think about how vast the universe is. It's like hitting the reset button on all the chaos in our heads.
It is. It helps us detach from all the worries and distractions that usually take up all our mental space. By focusing inward and maybe even outward to the cosmos, we can start to feel connected to something bigger than ourselves.
And I imagine that feeling of connection can be really grounding, especially when you start feeling insignificant again. It's like finding a calm spot in the middle of a storm. And I guess that's where the whole seeking knowledge thing comes in too, right?
Absolutely. The Fane is all about learning, exploring new ideas, and pushing the limits of what we know. But that doesn't mean you have to be studying all the time. It can be anything that really makes you curious and opens up your world.
So things like trying a new hobby, traveling to a new place, or even just talking to someone who has a different perspective, all of that counts as seeking knowledge.
Exactly. It's about nurturing that sense of wonder and possibility, embracing the fact that there's always more to learn, more to discover, both inside ourselves and in the world around us. It's that active engagement with life, that openness to new experiences that can help fight those feelings of insignificance.
It's interesting how all of our sources, even though they're so different, they all seem to point to action as a crucial part of finding meaning. The sermon talks about helping others. Nathaniel Carver finds purpose in his research, and the Fane emphasizes these practices that encourage actively participating in the universe.
It's definitely a pattern.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to responsibility, that idea that everything we do, even if it seems small, can have an impact that reaches far beyond our immediate world.
So it's not about waiting for some big life-changing opportunity to make a difference. It's about taking those small, everyday steps and recognizing that they're all part of a much larger picture.
Exactly. It's about finding meaning in the act of doing and creating and connecting with everything around us. And that can be incredibly empowering even when we're faced with the vastness of the cosmos. It reminds us that we're not just watching, we're active participants in the story of the universe.
It's like we're all part of this giant cosmic orchestra. And even though our individual instruments might seem small when we play together, we create something truly amazing.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think it's a perfect thought to leave our listeners with. The multiverse in all its vastness and mystery needs us to play our part. Insignificance isn't the end. It's the beginning. It's a doorway to understanding, to belonging, and to a sense of purpose that goes beyond our individual lives.
So, to our listener, as you go on this journey of finding meaning in a vast universe, remember you're not alone. Embrace your curiosity, explore new ideas, connect with others, and don't be afraid to take action even in small ways. Your actions, your choices, they have the power to make a difference, to be part of something truly extraordinary. And that's a pretty amazing thought to carry with you as you go out into the world today.